Welcome back to another episode of Brewing Business with Brady, where we serve up fresh business insights for owners of lower to mid-sized companies with a side of coffee. I'm your host, Mason Brady, and today we've got an incredible episode lined up just for you. Well, y'all, today I'm very excited to introduce a longtime friend that his name is Tyler Schmidt, and he is the general manager at Schmidty Racing Suspensions. Tyler and I are good friends that go way back all the way to high school, and we played, high school football together. Tyler brings a lot of unique perspective in regards to how to grow a business, both e-commerce and with wholesale distributors. And so I'm really excited for us to dive in and learn a lot about that today and get some valuable action and advice for our listeners. But just first wanted to give a fair warning that this episode was recorded under our old podcast name, Accelerating Lower Middle Market Value. And the fact is, we didn't find that very fun and relatable for any of our audience, that there was nothing there that really enticed people to kind of come in and grab onto that. And so we decided to rebrand to Brewing Business with Brady. And so, you will find references to our old podcast name throughout the episode, but never mind that the reality is that you are going to get a ton of actionable advice here. So we are so excited to dive in. Get ready for some good insights here. Thanks for being here on the podcast, Tyler.
Yep. No, it's been quite a journey, as you kind of pointed out. It's definitely not where I thought I would end up at. I was definitely super focused on agriculture, and it was a shift as life rolled out and things happened and the stars aligned, and I went against my opposite of what I thought I was going to do in high school and college, of never working for my dad or never working with my dad, and now I run the business for my dad.
Awesome. Yeah. Let's dive down that road. That is quite a journey. And so, tell us a little bit more about that decision and your journey of moving from the ag industry to helping to manage Schmidty Racing Suspensions with your dad. That kind of walk us through that and what motivated you to pursue that.
Yeah. So along my journey after Fresno State, moved to Nevada, lived in Nevada for a year, sold corn seed, alfalfa seed, fertilizer, ag chem products. That business was private business, ended up selling out to crop production services. So moved back to California and started working in the dairy feed industry. Worked there for about 2 or 3 years. And then from there, I'd been pursuing taking classes to finish out my PCA license requirements. So doing classes.
For our audience, real quick, can you kind of elaborate what's the PCA?
Yeah, so PCA is Pest Control Advisor. So basically it gives you a license to be able to write recommendations for growers, farmers of what pesticides, fertilizer, treatments you can put on crops. California being a huge state in agriculture, it was kind of the minimum standard or threshold of what you needed to have in order to get into any type of sales role in California in that industry. So my degree was in ag business, but a lot of the crop science classes I hadn't taken. So was finishing that out. In that process, I went to work for a company. It did not work out very well. The boss was horrible. I ended up working there for like a month, and I left, and I was like, crap, what am I going to do now? Like, I have, no job lined up. I had just gotten married. My wife was not super thrilled with that. So about 6 months went by. I was working for my dad. He was doing construction and the shock business at the time. So throughout the day, I was, either doing shock, tear down, rebuilding suspension, or helping him remodel houses. And in that time, I had applied for the job with BASF. So it was their vegetable seed business, which is Nunham's, and ended up getting that job as a sales role, and I worked in California for about a month and a half, and then they were needing a sales rep in Arizona. And part of the job, application process was, are you willing to relocate? I'm like, yeah, I'll get out of California. I have no problem doing that. So got relocated to Arizona, which is what brought me here. So been here 6 years now. I was with BASF for about another, I think it was 2 years. And I was in a sales role and then moved into a sales management role. So sales management, I was managing our lettuce, spinach, artichoke, leek business for the U.S., Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand. So it was a pretty large sales territory. I think it was like $20 to $21 million sales territory. So it was pretty big. And I was the youngest crop crop sales manager. So youngest crop sales manager that none of them or BSF had ever had. So there was a lot of barriers that were broken down. I had applied for the position a couple times, 2 really bad interviews, and then the third one was like kind of like guided into the position. So it was huge opportunity and like a massive learning opportunity. So a lot of what I learned in that is what I've brought here today. Why did I leave ag? My parents were looking to get out of California, and the opportunity came up of, hey, would you like to be traveling less? I was going to Salinas, Monterey area probably once every other week in the summertime, and for usually 3 to 4 days, and then 2 to 3 trips were planned. It was during COVID, so they didn't end up happening, but basically 2 to 3 trips to Australia and New Zealand a year.
Wow. Yeah.
Usually 1 to 2 trips to the Netherlands a year because our global headquarters is in the Netherlands, and then 3 to 4 trips up to Boise. So that's where our U.S. headquarters was at. So a lot of traveling. Plans to go to Mexico again. COVID kind of impacted a lot of the international traveling, but I was just gone a lot. We had just had our first kid, and as much as I love and still do love agriculture, it was too much traveling. So my parents were looking to move, had that discussion of coming into the business with kind of a pathway of eventually taking over the business at some point, having that discussion, and made the switch. So here I am today. I've been in this role for about 3 years. I would say when I started in the role, my dad was definitely very hands-on, controlling of what was going on in the business. And to today, I mean, I run the business. My dad typically finds out secondhand what's going on. Not always happy about it, but the reality is it's been a transition, and we're in the process of trying to kind of move the business from them, and then trying to find a pathway of basically transitioning the business over to me. So that's kind of where the business and the process of how everything has gone from agriculture and seeds and dirt and to now running a suspension business. We have an off-road race team that I race in as well. So yeah, it's been a huge change. So
I want to definitely, for our audience, make sure that they understand Schmidty Racing Suspensions and the business overall. But first, real quick, you kind of mentioned that, yeah, your dad is, offhand hearing about some of the decisions made and may not always like it. And, talking with a lot of people in family businesses that, there's this concept, either, you ask for forgiveness or you ask for permission. Sometimes it's better to just go ask for forgiveness. And what would you tell our audience that, because I think that is one of the challenges in many family businesses is that somebody, the top, person or, the parent or whatever that may look like, grandparents that definitely have controlled a lot. And so for some of the, the next generation coming in, how would you recommend to them to actually begin to make headway in, being able to manage the business and be able to begin taking over things, especially when that person that, you're beginning to take over from has definitely been a more controlling, type of personality or profile. And I want to use the word controlling in the right way. Just, people that have been very invested and very in the daily operations of the business that, is it kind of just, hey, the best thing that you could do is ask for forgiveness, or what would you advise to some of our audience that, could be going through that same situation?
The backstory of Schmidty Racing, just like a little blip of it. Basically, my dad, when he was doing construction, we went on a family trip, broke his back, was in like fused back vertebrae and whatnot. So that was the only thing he could do. Like it was right when the housing market crashed. So it was kind of this has been his baby is probably the best way I could describe it. It's a business, but it's what kept me and CV's like in our school growing up. Like it was what paid the bills to keep them from going bankrupt. It like has been his little world kind of outside of family and stuff. So coming into the business, I had been managing, the sales team like that. I was used to being in charge, managing a team, and kind of stepped back into, I guess, a role of the balance, like you said, of child, yet employee, yet partner at the same time, all 3 of those, and balancing it. And looking back 3 years ago, I probably didn't do the best job of doing it. So advice-wise, I think the starting thing is you have to earn the respect, right? And like give some time in the role. My initial like entrance into the business was this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is what I've done before. I know this works. Like, this is how we're going to grow the business. This is the areas we need to grow in. This is what I'm seeing. And it's a lot of it was not necessarily my dad didn't know that, but he just didn't know how to do it. Um, but it felt like he was getting the reins taken away from his business, and it was his thing that he had, put together. So social media, marketing, advertising, all the stuff that they didn't do at all. Like, they didn't know advertising. 100% of their advertising was word of mouth. And when I came into the business, we had an Instagram and Facebook page, but we weren't really doing anything on it. So, and even if we were, it was very to say it blatantly, it's probably unprofessional. Like, it was a picture of stuff, right? Like, it wasn't anything that was going to grab attention or content that was worth looking at. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a process of getting from that, I think, initial stage of learning the business, putting the time in, giving the respect that's due of the experience that's there. And, even to today, I think we've had our headbutting of, he has experience, which he does, but at the same time, I've gained a lot of experience in the 3 years of what we've been doing. And there are things even today that I'm probably better at than he is, and he's been doing it for longer than me. But there's also things that he has more wisdom and knowledge on that I don't have. And it's definitely having a humble attitude at times, which, again, not the best at, but that would probably be the best advice of, take the advice you can get. Someday they're not going to be there to give you the advice that you hope for, and be willing to, say I'm sorry at sometimes because you made a decision that they probably would have disagreed with, but in a leadership role, sometimes you have to make that call. So, there's no perfect answer, but I think the biggest takeaway is don't miss out on respecting the person that was there to start with, because I think if you don't, you run the risk of either you're going to get pushed back out of the business or you're going to push them out, and then it's going to be worse on the family than what the business value is. So
I think a lot of it, I mean, obviously, like you said, being humble, being respectful, but at the same time, not being fearful to stand up for what you really believe in too.
yeah,
That the balance of all of those things and how you do that is just so important. And you're going to pull some levers in some areas at different points, right? But if you can balance those things, it's really great. Tell us more about Schmidty Racing Suspensions. That you even said y'all have a race team. Like, let's understand the business a bit more and what you're doing. That, let the audience know, like, what products do you sell? Like, I mean, obviously suspensions, but would love you to elaborate on that and what you're doing today.
yeah. So our primary industry of what we, I guess, sell or tailor products to is the UTV side by side, Polaris Razors, Can-Am X3s, Kawasaki KRXs, Honda Talons. I mean, there's a lot of different sport models out there, but primarily it's the UTV side by side market. So guys that are going out to the desert with their families, riding their vehicles, sand dunes, East Coast, it's a lot of mudding and trail riding. But that's primarily our market. Product wise, we sell on eBay, Amazon, and our own website. We have in-store retail as well, so customers can bring their shocks in or come into our shop and buy products as well locally. We sell everything from, like, we call it service kits, like O-rings and seals for a customer to rebuild their shocks, the actual oil to rebuild them, tools to rebuild them, nitrogen kits to recharge the shocks. And then we have some products that my dad developed because we had the components for other nitrogen tools that we've actually sell. Like, we sell tools for geothermal, like HVAC tools that get sold in the Midwest and anywhere where geothermal type, like, heating and cooling is used. We've sold some nitrogen kits to, like, the military, so some, not a lot, but stuff that gets sold into, like, the Air Force, Army for servicing, like, aircraft and tanks and stuff like that, which is really interesting. Some of those tools get sold into, like, big mining companies for maintaining, like, the struts on some of these big bulldozers and loaders and stuff like that. But again, the vast majority of our business is the suspension for side by side. So, like, in shop, our largest market is the actual tuning aspect and service side of it. So, say somebody buys a vehicle from a dealer, they basically add a bunch of add-ons or accessories onto the vehicle. Well, now where their vehicle is from when it started to where it's at now. It's heavier. They have different people riding in the car. They do different types of riding terrain, more aggressive, less aggressive, depending on what they do. And then they bring their vehicle or send their shocks into us. We take them apart, adjust them, put different springs on them, redo the internals of the shocks, and basically adjust the ride quality to tailor to what these specific customers need. So whether it's racing, trail riding, sand dunes, desert, we've done a ton of R&D with basically every setup that we sell that we can adjust or tailor the shocks to what that customer specifically is after. That's what we do. That's where we've grown the most. We have two, I guess, major competitors. There's three of us I would say, in the industry that are kind of like the top names. And the other two are in Phoenix. So it's a very competitive market. And it's a market that just the suspension industry in general has, everybody can do it, right? Like it's something people can buy tools and do it on their garage. So that's been the challenge, I think, and probably the challenge in the future is, differentiating your product and trying to compete with probably more Midwest and East Coast customers is the cost of sending shocks into you because everything's gotten more expensive. So, overcoming that barrier of the cost and why Jimmy down the road is taking shocks apart and moving shims around or washers on the inside of the shocks and drilling holes and stuff. Why, what's better about you than what he's doing? So Facebook is a great tool, but it's also your worst enemy. So it's, Instagram, Facebook, and social media platforms in general they're awesome, but at the same time, one person going online can do a lot of damage to a business's brand. From what I've seen, and not only to our brand, but just in general, it's one negative person that, talks really loud can have a pretty big impact on any type of business. So that's kind of the basis about us. We do race. We started this past year, but it's more of we're using it kind of as like a proving grounds for product. Yes, we want to be competitive. Yes, we want to go, and like we're racing actually next week in the Vegas to Reno race. So it's a 550-mile point-to-point race in Nevada. So it's going to be pretty intense.
That's a lot of miles. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and it's the biggest U.S. race that they run, and then it's also probably the biggest side-by-side UTV race that's probably happened in the U.S. It's got, in our class, I want to say there's 28 vehicles, and then like the combined class for that I would say are comparable models, there's like 48 to 50 vehicles. So there's a lot of entrants, and you're competing against the factory team. So if people are familiar with like automotive or supercross type stuff, you're competing with like Honda or GM like type teams with multi-million-dollar budgets and running in the same class as them. So it's pretty intense, and hopefully we do well. But the reality is we wanted to put our product up against the biggest and the best of what's out in the industry. So that's kind of the reasoning behind the racing. So
a little bit of underdog move too, right? So I would love to understand. You kind of talked about that a bit, and I agree. Especially for people, I want to be careful. Our audience isn't necessarily starting a business, but I think that people within the lower middle market, revenue range, usually we're talking like 5 to 50 million, and that can move a little bit. But I think that people can overthink differentiation too. A lot of people would be surprised. It's like, hey, I'm in financial services, corporate financial services, and I will say, like, one of the biggest differentiators is just customer service. Like, if you just follow through and you proactively communicate, that's the biggest thing in the world. That I've made selections of professional service firms just by how they followed up. Like, nothing about their actual technical talent, just by how they followed up. So like, differentiation doesn't need to be something grand and amazing, but you mentioned that a lot of people can start this in their garage. How, especially since you all have been around for a while, and your competitors, et cetera, like, what do you feel is your differentiator? How would you, advise our audience on finding that differentiator? Like, how do you do that within Schmidty Racing Suspensions so that, something that you've built over time, that somebody doesn't come and take your lunch? Like, can you elaborate on that for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an internal discussion probably in the last month of, we're kind of at the point of, from a growth standpoint, you can go the Walmart Costco method of, really low margins and try and set up distribution centers or dealers all over the United States, which is kind of the theory and mentality of our competitors. Cheapest components they can find and source and set up, thousands of dealers all over the United States. Whereas we have been more of a direct to consumer model. We get dealers that want, are sending us requests to get set up with product, but our discounts from a dealer standpoint aren't, they're probably half of what they could get from some of our competitors. So that typically is a turnoff for them, right? I mean, everybody's trying to make money in business. So from a business standpoint, I would say our differentiation's been, quality of product. So sticking with, yeah, our product's going to be more expensive, but you know exactly what you're going to get. It's going to hold up. You're not going to have issues with it. We do a ton of R&D, which, we can pack up. If you go from a consumer standpoint, you went on somebody else's like Instagram or social media page, you're going to see on our page a ton of R&D. So like a vehicle out in the desert where we're taking shocks on and off of a car 20, 30 times and doing tuning on it. So when a customer spends a couple $1,000s on getting the shocks done, they know that actually what you're talking about, and you're not just putting one setup in that everybody's getting the same thing and they all act like it's being personalized, but it actually is being adjusted and tailored to what the customer is after. And then customer service is huge. I mean, there's been so many times where people call in and like I'll be in the back shop or both of my mom and our other guy up front are busy and like I'll have a note to call somebody back and I actually call them back the same day and they're like, wow, like just the fact that you called me back that day is like incredible because that's not the normal, right? I mean, people aren't used to getting called back or having a follow up. So when you can go the extra mile or giving, I to my wife's probably demise, she isn't super happy about it, but answering social media messages on the weekend, like,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it's not always enjoyable, and there's just sometimes not fun discussions you need to have with customers over the weekend. But the reality is, you're there and you're present. That I would say is the biggest thing for us and what sets us apart. And doing in the end from our side of it, it's our job and duty to explain to customers why we're doing that and why other people aren't, and advertising of what we do differently. But that's from our side of it. I think what we've done and what we've seen. I mean, the biggest challenge for us today is to continue to grow. What's the balance of how much margin are you willing to give up on your product to grow your product, and then once you give that up, you got to get the sales, the volume to justify the discount you're giving. So we've gotten some stuff in place of what we're trying to put into action over the last year and kind of going forward. But it's definitely been kind of coming back to the beginning. It's been a stretch for my dad of, that wasn't what he was used to. He was used to everything was direct, and to be giving away margin that's coming out of his pocket. It's like, it's definitely a difference in mentality. So it's been a process to get converted to that, but that's kind of where we're focusing at, of balancing that direct to indirect market.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I'd love for you to elaborate on that a bit further. I mean, I know, especially in your sales background, in B2B sales, that it's a little bit different. I mean, I hope I'm not over assuming, but it is, a little bit different that you're direct to consumer model right now. And then it sounds like, you're moving a little bit into wholesale and trying to work and work and distribute out your product more through those methods. That I hope I'm not over assuming, but I'd love to understand like that shift for you of those, tactics and learning that I've also worked in a B2B sales organization, and we did a startup where we tried to do direct to consumer, and we completely underestimated exactly how much time, effort, and money needs to go into online marketing and how many touch points you have to have with a customer online before that they're ready to make a purchase. And it was a huge underestimation, and we had to close the business down. And so I'd love to kind of understand from your perspective what that shift has been like, and what are some of the best tactics and strategies you can give to our audience?
Yeah. So coming from Nunham's, which is, majority of the vegetable seed business goes through distributors, right?
Yep.
So it's B2B type sales. Nunham's was unique in the fact that they actually, before I started there, they had just switched from dealers to B2B type sales direct to consumer.
Got it.
And it
Got it.
disrupted the entire vegetable seed market. Like, it, obviously all these dealers and distributors were really upset. So there was a lot of frustration with growers, and growers wanted to buy from the guy that they always bought their seeds from. And then they had some new sales guy coming around calling on them to try and sell them stuff. So in saying that, it was a good experience because I think coming into this market, it's very much like what the vegetable seed market was, where, it's expected that if you sell a product and it's liked by a lot of people, that you should sell it to every online retailer and every shop that's within a 5 mile radius of you that does the same thing and put it on their shelf. And that's just not been our mentality. From a lettuce, like especially in lettuce seed sales, we had 2 seed distributors in California that covered California and Arizona, which is the primary growing for the United States for lettuce. So there was probably 5 or 6 other distributors that we could have worked for, that probably once a month, once every other month, I was getting a phone call from them, seeing if I changed my mind, if I wanted to allow them to start selling our product. But what I noticed or found out with having that type of setup was you get brand loyalty, whereas you're not something that's just on somebody's shelf. And from a customer standpoint, the actual end user, they were going to them specifically for our product, right? Like, it wasn't like they were going to them because they bought their broccoli seed from them or something else. Like, it was, I want Nunham's product. I want their spinach seed. I want their vegetable seed. So coming into the Schmidty Racing side of it, that was my mentality of how I wanted to set up our dealers. I wanted people that, yes, you're in a great location, you're a trustworthy and good partner to work with, but your loyalty and brand recognition has to be with us. Like, if you're selling 3 or 4 other competitors' products, my product's going to be more expensive because of what we use. So now, when you're having that discussion from a sales mentality, because I've been in the sales role, you want to make the sale. I'm probably not the product that you're going to be pushing. You're going to be pushing the one that you're going to make the most money on. So we've partnered with dealers in the U.S. that pretty much exclusively work with our product. We do have some exceptions, but it's more just for exposure on certain customers, just because they do have such a big footprint. And honestly, they're not really even moving a ton of product. It's more of just the brand recognition at expos and stuff, having your product on their vehicles. But our larger volume dealers are working directly with us. So that's been my focus, is trying to find people that are loyal to the brand. And instead of having your product everywhere, which you can do and go that model, it's been trying to partner with people specifically, which from their side of it, I mean, they've said it to us, like, they'll come in to get product or get something done, and because they were coming for a Schmidty Racing product, they're buying a light bar, or they're buying new tires or wheels or other accessories that they're coming to that specific distributor for, and they're getting additional sales out of it. So that's been our model of kind of what we've focused on. It's definitely different than the industry standard, but again, kind of coming back to my experiences through the ag side of it, it's definitely influenced what and how we do our model. I touched on a little bit earlier about, the cost of products going up for consumers. So, customers don't want to pay $200 to ship their shocks from Maryland to Arizona to get stuff done. So we are in the process of setting up, we call them garages or installed garages. So basically they come out to us, get trained on our procedures, products. Our philosophy is we want it to be like the McDonald's hamburger, whether you're getting it from us in Arizona or us in Michigan or Oregon. The hamburger tastes the same. It's got the same ingredients put together the same way. So we basically are setting up these remote installers of our product where customers can bring their shocks to them and they're not having to ship them, and they can get the tuning, the rebuild, the revalving, the spring kit installs done locally. And we're still controlling what's going into that build. The customer, this garage installer or dealer of ours is placing the order with us. We put together what we would recommend if they were sending the shocks into us, and then we're just sending the raw components out to these locations. So that's been kind of our target of growth. Obviously, again, it's going to have some limits to how much in certain areas you can grow that to, but the reality is it's kind of like a franchise type method where you're spreading out your brand throughout the United States and not having to basically just drop your margins to try and hit this massive volume type market. You can keep your margins maintained and also at the same time grow your business and grow your footprint. So
Yeah. Didn't mean to cut you off, Tyler. Yeah, I love that, like you said, kind of the franchise model that I think so many people look at, or especially business owners in the lower middle market think that to expand their footprint, they're going to have to open up an office in a location, et cetera, et cetera. Like this is the method to do it. But it's really cool how you found in we encourage these businesses in the market that we're talking to that systems and processes are so integral to building value in a company that if you have something that is systemized and processed that you can replicate and multiply, then that you've created something of value that can go out to the marketplace and you can grow and scale that a heck of a lot easier. And so it's neat because you're looking at it that I think a lot of people are looking at growth or scaling that they have to do it themselves and therefore they have to carry the overhead and they have to figure out how to manage. And then if you have multiple locations, then you have to have this overarching management team and pay a bunch of money and salaries to manage all these new locations. And you fatten up your company and your margins aren't that great as you're trying to grow, but rather it sounds like you've come up with something to grow and scale and to help continue to build the brand loyalty and keep people consistent, but without having to add a bunch of overhead to what you're doing. That you bring people in, you train them under your systems, you get them back out. It sounds amazing. That's a really good idea.
yeah, so the intention was it's like, okay, how do you grow your sales without one either lowering your margin or acquiring somebody, buying a business at another location, which is going to exponentially grow your cost. And we have the process. We're super efficient of how we do stuff. I mean, that's my dad's area. He's really designed the back part of our shock, like this process of when shocks come in, they get torn down, assembled. It's very much production line type stuff where everything's in the same area. You go to a location or a station and you know exactly where stuff's at. So from an efficiency standpoint, we definitely do stuff really well. And we have a total of I think 6 people here. So between my parents and we have 3 other guys. And our busy time of the year, we could have another person, but our summers are fairly quiet just because of the seasonality of it. But yeah, I mean, you can always grow and add more costs in, but it's like where can we grow revenue without having to spend a bunch of money? And
Yep.
this is where we found, it was an opportunity to grow the footprint, which was obviously beneficial. Get some more people talking about your product, recognition, brand recognition in the industry, but at the same time, just exposing and giving people the opportunity that potentially wouldn't have came to you. They wanted to send their shocks to you, but they can't afford to spend $200 in shipping, or they don't have the tools to remove the shocks from their vehicle to start with, right? So now not only do they have to ship them, they got to go spend $300 or $400 at Lowe's or at the hardware store to get the tools or the jack or the jack stands to set their vehicle on. It's little things that you don't think about, but that's the reality of these people have to spend money just to spend money. And sometimes people are like, hey, I'd rather just not do it, or I'll settle for lower quality because that's what I can get done locally.
No, it makes complete sense. It's kind of interesting that as we're talking through this to see the different, roles that feels like you and your dad have kind of taken or, have in the business that obviously, you're creating a vision. And I think for our audience, I encourage, it's so important to understand each other's strengths, but realizing that a business needs different types of profiles. That diversity is important. I don't want to get into all the other topics of diversity, but diversity of thought is incredibly important, right? As to what type of profile people are, how they think. And it definitely seems like you're bringing the vision of like, where can this business go? What can it do? How do we build a brand? How do we build something of value here? And then, your dad creating some of those systems and processes, and he started the business out of necessity, it feels like, right? That he did it, but there probably wasn't as grand of a vision as you're trying to create and you're trying to build, but has certainly implemented those systems and processes and that tinkering to actually have something that you can replicate. And it's just kind of neat that, as we're hearing this and hearing your story, that how those different roles and how you've combined them and built them and created success with them, that it's really neat that you've wrapped all that together.
Yeah. No, we're still a small business, right? So we're still like, I'm in the back shop working on shocks, and he's up front answering, customers' calls, and we do weekly meetings where we're having, discussions about what we're doing, where are we looking to grow at, or what challenges are we seeing with production or getting new products, designed, developed, etc. But yeah, we've definitely tried, or at least I've tried to put in place kind of some guidelines of where our lanes are, because when you start getting into somebody else's lane, it doesn't typically end, super great, especially in family type deals where we're working with each other, and then they want to come over and see their grandkids at the end of the day, and then we go to the same church on Sunday, and it's like, after a while, your your parent meter or son meter has run out. So yeah, it's been good to have some type of direction of where our areas are at. And I think from his side of it as well, coming back to that point of how that transition looks, making sure that they're still what's the right word, like that they feel still needed in the business, right? Like, give them a role that brings value to what they do, and that they're excited and want to show up to do. Because if they're just, I know my dad said it to me, like, he feels like an employee sometimes, which, coming from doing everything to stepping back and being probably more in that type of a role where he's here doing stuff, but he's not having to oversee numbers and make decisions on things, purchasing, and giving that value, I think, is important to, maintain their want and need to be a part of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sounds like you're managing that well. Yeah, it feels like it's very much so evoking that, yeah, there's that humility in you. And I know it's always a humble thing. You started the podcast of saying, yeah, it's something I need to work on. Well, that is humility in itself, right? But yeah, the reality of you recognizing that, yeah, there's things that you have to do to help build that relationship and make sure that relationship stays alive. That, I think a lot of people in family businesses or the next generation coming in, it can be very much so, hey, what do I want out of this and what's in it for me? But it's still, yeah, you're still dealing with people's emotions, and old habits die hard. And I know that you and I are people of faith, but God can change things very quickly, but also sometimes as human beings in our in our nature, that change can be very difficult because we don't always want to trust what we should trust, right?
Yeah.
And so it can be difficult. We can wrap ourselves wanting to have an identity in something, but our identity shouldn't be in there, but our sinful nature causes us to do that at times, right? So we're kind of we're coming close to the end here. I'd love to understand, and I appreciate you, Tyler. I know for our audience, you probably all are familiar that, hey, we send a list of questions, and I think Tyler and I have deviated quite a bit from those original questions that we set up. So I do want to wrap up with a couple of questions here to understand and have our audience understand this better. That so you've talked a lot about what you're doing in regards to getting shops trained on your systems, procedures for how you adjust those shocks and those suspensions. And you've also talked about brand loyalty and how you're continuing to focus on building that brand loyalty and that brand strength and working with distributors that are focused on just selling your suspensions. But in addition to that, what is the 5-year goal of Schmidty Racing Suspensions? Like, where do you see this business in 5 years? That you've talked a lot about things that you're doing, but yeah, like, what's the overarching goal that you could say, hey, like, this is what we want to see with it. This is where we want it to see it go.
Yeah. So we're in the process of probably moving into that, what that would look like. So next month, so August. So next month we move into a building suite that's about twice the square footage of what we're in today. So we're in about 4,300 square foot. We're moving into like 7,800 square foot shop. So what does that look like? I mean, from a sales perspective, I think there's at some point going to be a cap on our market, and then maintaining it, but diversifying. So continuing to develop products. That's a huge area for us is growing what product lines we offer. So right now it's shocks primarily for the UTV market. We are in the process of getting partnered up with Bilstein, so massive German suspension company. They're wanting us to be their like Southwestern branch service center for all off-road stuff, and then like their specific tuning of their aftermarket shocks. So that's a huge opportunity with them, growing that market, and partnering with a massive distributor is going to be huge. And then in that same segment, we are trying to expand outside of suspension. So we get a lot of customers, and especially in the wintertime, snowbirds, Midwestern people, that Canadians that are coming down to the Arizona region for the wintertime for cooler weather and I guess warmer weather than where they're coming from. But they want their vehicle service, right? They don't want to work on it. And not to knock any of the dealers around us, or not dealers, but like the distributors of like Polaris, Can-Am model type stuff, they just can't get in for service. So they're like, hey, who can do our service? And we've never had anybody to recommend for that. Being we're growing and going into a bigger square footage location, costs are going up. So our goal is to kind of move into that service center as well and start doing additional services that we don't do today, which will grow our staff needs at some point as well. So kind of trying to see where that balances out at from a business ownership standpoint. I know my parents want to phase out, so that's going to be definitely the process of in the next 5 years of what that looks like. Refilling those important key roles of who I rely on, who they rely on throughout the day, and a lot of their retirement's been the business. So it's going to be entrusted to me of maintaining and managing the business, and as they go out, putting people back into their roles, training people up to be able to fill that responsibility. So that's probably less strategic for other businesses, but for us, it's definitely important for fulfilling that those roles of my parents and how that looks. My mom's been trying to get out of the business for the last 3 years since she moved here. She said, I'm going to work in there for a year, and then I'm going to go down to 1 day. And she's still full time. So that's definitely the process, but she's in the same aspect as my dad is with the shop. She is very numbers driven, bookkeeping, and trying to fulfill what her expectations are in a bookkeeper, and what's getting done with the books is going to be, it'll be a challenge. So that for us is probably our biggest challenge and hurdle, but definitely goal for 5 years out is getting them out of the business where they can retire, relax, enjoy their hard work of what they've done their whole life, and at the same time bring people in and get people trained in those positions so that we have a seamless transition from the first generation to what the business is going to look like with them out of it. So
you have a clear idea of what's coming and what challenges you're going to have to face. I mean, we got out of that obviously you're expanding product lines, that expanding service capabilities, moving to a new location, figuring out a plan for exit for your parents, and then obviously you're going to have to replace their leadership in their roles, right? And so, all big objectives over the next few years. And so, by all means, those are big strategic items that, especially the exit part of it, and having to get the next right team members, right, that are just as dedicated and committed to the business as they have been. Yeah, it's going to be a big deal. So, big things on the horizon for you. Tyler, thank you for your time. We like to end each podcast with a question to our podcast guest. So to yourself, what's one piece of advice you'd give to CEOs, presidents, owners in the lower middle market who are looking to accelerate their company's growth and create lasting business value? What's one piece of advice you give them?
Yeah. So my advice is, whatever you're doing, make sure you're doing what you love, right? I mean, you're going to have challenges that come at you every day. People are going to be attacking you. You got competitors that are coming after your business, your market share. Do whatever you love and do it hard. For us as a family business, it's, our priorities are family first, faith first, and the business at the end of it. I mean, yes, we want to be successful, but in the end, our relationship outside of this business is more important than, making another dollar or making something happen here in the business. So that would be the other takeaway is, make sure you don't lose sight of your family, lose sight of your faith for, worldly gains of what a business is. So
Awesome. Yeah. Great advice, Tyler. Thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
yeah, thank you for having me.